And one of the world's most admired and resilient democracies finds itself under siege, Switzerland. The neutral powerhouse of Europe and global financial hub and the standard bearer of legal sovereignty is facing two seismic threats from its closest partners. On one front, a sudden and punitive 39% tariff from the United States imposed by President Trump, and on the other, creeping legal absorption by the European Union under the so-called Ukraine model. What does this dual pressure mean for the Swiss economy, its legal order, and its global standing? Can Switzerland maintain its exceptionalism, or are we witnessing the quiet erosion of its sovereignty? And I'm Salma Al-Fi'i, and this is In Focus. As reported by AP, Switzerland woke up on August the 1st, its national day, to a devastating economic blow, a 39% tariff on its exports to the United States. The Trump administration, fixated on a $38.5 billion trade deficit, bypassed prior negotiations and unilaterally escalated its trade war. Swiss luxury exports, especially watches and chocolates, are reeling. Smaller firms are expected to lose access to the U.S. market entirely. Pharmaceuticals, a sector with $1 billion U.S. investments, are bracing for impact. The Swiss government, stunned by the betrayal after what they believed was a settled agreement, has vowed to seek a solution, but time is ticking. And in parallel, Brussels is pushing Switzerland towards institutional surrender. The so-called treaty package, ratified in December 2024, compels Switzerland to adopt new EU laws dynamically, under the threat of sanctions and with the European Court of Justice, the CJEU, holding final interpretive power. Professor Baudenbacher has termed this as the Ukraine model, a framework previously imposed on post-Soviet republics. Though sold as a compromise, it strips Switzerland of judicial autonomy and installs a pro forma arbitration panel as a facade for the CJEU supremacy. Unlike past bilateral agreements based on mutual recognition and equal standing, the new model pushes Switzerland into a subordinate role. And worse, the Federal Council approved the agreement without fully reading it, fearing retaliation from Brussels. And joining us tonight is the man perhaps best positioned to answer these questions, Professor Karl Baudenbacher, the former president of the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association Court. And welcome, sir, to In Focus today and being with me. Professor, let me ask you, and let's begin with the U.S. tariffs. Do you think there was any legal or economic rationale behind Trump's decision, or was it just purely a political move, in your opinion?
Well, I think it was just a decision by the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. As far as I have been informed, the Swiss government had negotiated with a team before, and they were quite confident that they would get away with some 10% of tariff. And then it seems that President Trump himself, in the last minute, more or less, said, no, I don't accept this. I will put this tariff to 39%.
Mm-hmm. Well, given that Switzerland eliminated industrial tariffs in 2024, how do you, sir, interpret this move from Washington in terms of reciprocity and trade diplomacy?
Well, I think it's the way President Trump acts. He has seen, or he claims, that the U.S. has a trade deficit with Switzerland in the amount of $40 billion. He only speaks about goods. The Swiss usually say, well, when it comes to services, it looks quite different. But it seems that President Trump then just said, okay, these 40 billion I cannot accept. And that's why I fixed this customs tariff now the way I have. Yeah, it's pretty much the way he acts. We have seen that before.
Okay. Well, we can see the impact on luxury goods and pharmaceuticals. That's already visible at the moment. What mechanisms do you think, like the WTO or otherwise, does Switzerland have at its disposal?
Well, you know, WTO has been severely weakened in the last years, not least by the United States. And there have been some professors suggesting that Switzerland should go to the WTO. But I have doubts whether this will work at all, and I have doubts whether this will work in time. Switzerland would need a solution now, and as far as I see, the government continues negotiating. They say they have seen that President Trump is prepared to review his decisions. Well, he has done that in other cases, and they hope to find a solution within the next 7 days.
Professor, you have written extensively about the EU-Swiss treaty package. If you can just briefly explain to us that what it's all about, and why do you actually call it the Ukraine model, and what dangers does it pose to the Swiss sovereignty?
Well, the name, the Ukraine model, comes from the United Kingdom, because after Brexit, this has only been, also been proposed to the UK. And the Ukraine mechanism is this mechanisms where the European Commission can unilaterally take a non-member state, in this case now Switzerland, to a pro forma arbitration tribunal. However, this arbitration tribunal is under an obligation to ask the Court of Justice of the European Union for a binding judgment in almost every case. And the British then refer to this as the Ukraine model. In the meantime, we have the Ukraine war, and it's a little bit odd to use this expression, but it has been established.
Okay. Well, many in the Swiss government claim the arbitration panel offers neutrality. You've strongly disagreed. Could you clarify why you see this as a fiction?
Well, it's quite clear that this arbitration tribunal has no independence. All these claims by government people that the tribunal can decide on its own jurisdiction, that the tribunal has the last word, which implies that the tribunal may deviate from the judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union. They are all false. At the end of the day, this is only a fake tribunal. It is a mechanism which shall conceal that the sovereignty has been transferred to the European Union. I am not aware of any independent foreign observer who would not see it that way. Those who claim that this tribunal is independent are all Swiss professors or professors teaching at Swiss universities.
Sir, historically, Switzerland's independence has served it well. Is this treaty package, do you think, a break from the country's legal and diplomatic tradition?
I think that those who have pushed for this package, they hope that it will be the first step for EU membership. They want to conclude this package as a point of no return on the path to EU membership. They cannot admit that openly, but it is quite obvious because, you know, if you look at where it comes from, from these four former Soviet states,
Yes.
Ukraine, Moldavia, Georgia, and Armenia. They all want to join the European Union. And interestingly, this model has also been proposed to the North African states, including Egypt, if I'm correctly informed. I have a couple of years ago had the honor of advising the government of the Kingdom of Morocco, and this issue was amply discussed there.
Was tackled, yeah. And Professor, what parallels do you see between how Brussels treated the UK post-Brexit and how this is approaching Switzerland now?
Well, they have treated them quite equally. The UK has left the single market and has concluded a trade and cooperation agreement which functions with a true arbitration mechanism. That means with an independent arbitration tribunal, whereas the Swiss say we want to stay in the single market, not fully, but partially. And if you want to stay in the single market, you have to accept a court mechanism. And the Swiss government said, then we accept the Court of Justice of the other side, which in my view is a severe mistake.
And with Trump on one side and the EU on the other, is the Swiss neutrality being squeezed out of existence, do you think, sir?
Well, it's difficult to say, but Swiss neutrality has been under pressure also because of the Ukraine war.
Yes.
Because the Swiss there have joined the sanctions of the European Union. And the Russians then said, well, Switzerland has lost its neutrality. Now we have the situation in the United States, and we have the situation with the European Union. I would say it would be a huge mistake, to rush through now this treaty package with the European Union because of the difficulties with the Americans. The treaty is a bad treaty, and under no circumstances should this be accepted and ratified.
Yes. Professor, in light of these pressures that we're seeing now, what would a smart strategic response look like? Do you think it should be legal, diplomatic, or an economic option?
Well, Switzerland is a small country. It is an economic giant, but still it's a country with 9 million inhabitants. So the options are limited. Diplomacy is certainly the most important option.
Yes.
I am not of the view that Switzerland should take any measures against the United States. They should continue talking and looking for a solution.
Sir, you've argued that Swiss neutrality is being undermined through the external coercion and internal appeasement. Who is driving this from within the Swiss system?
Well, there are those who badly want Switzerland to join the European Union. The political left and the Greens are pushing for this. The pharmaceutical industry and the machinery industry is in favor of this unequal treaty with the Court of Justice of the European Union as the competent court for Switzerland. But I cannot see that they think as far as joining the European Union. They are just thinking in terms of, securing the best opportunities for export of their goods. And that's probably a little bit short-sighted.
And Professor, some say the treaty package would offer legal certainty for businesses. Do you think this is accurate and right, or is it actually there's an increasing risk of a legal confusion?
This, in my view, is a contradictio in adjecto, a contradiction in itself. If you have the court of the other side, you never have legal certainty.
And how do you assess the Swiss government's communication strategy with the public on this issue? Has there been transparency, sir?
No, there has not been transparency, not enough transparency. The government does not inform in an objective way.
And why wouldn't there be? What's the reasons? Would you have any, if you can share with us? I mean, why wouldn't there be any transparency? Any reasons behind that?
But I think it's quite obvious. The treaty is so bad. that they cannot say the full truth. So they are telling all sorts of stories that this arbitration tribunal is independent, that it has the last word, that the people have the last word in legislation, and so on. And all this is untenable.
Professor Baudenbach, there are concerns about democratic legitimacy, especially as the Federal Council approved the agreement without full review. How serious is this issue constitutionally?
It is, in my view, a serious issue, and they have made another step. Under the Swiss constitution, there can be no doubt that in the case of the referendum, a double majority will be needed. That means there must be a majority of the voters and a majority of the cantons. And the government has so far taken the view that the majority of the cantons is not required in order to facilitate the passing of this unequal treaty package. The last word has not been spoken. It will be for the parliament to take the decision. But so far, that's another sour point in my view.
Well, could the Swiss courts or the legal scholars play a role in pushing back against what you have called as a legal subjugation?
Well, interestingly, most of the Swiss scholars are in favor of this treaty. I don't exactly know why. I suspect that most of them also hope that in the long run, Switzerland will join the European Union, so that this will be a first step on this path. That's my only explanation. One could also imagine that some of them hope to sit on this so-called arbitration tribunal one day. You know, human beings are human beings.
And do you think there's a viable legal or diplomatic alternative path that maybe would preserve access to the EU market without this level of legal compromise?
No, that's quite clear. You know, originally the EU had proposed to Switzerland, if you want to be in the single market, at least in certain sectors, then you must accept a supranational court, and you could accept the EFTA court, my former court.
Yes.
And the idea was that Switzerland could also have a judge on the EFTA court. The Swiss government said no, and now they are faced with the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the court of the other side, which is a court which lacks independence vis-à-vis Switzerland, and where Switzerland will not be able to have a judge.
And Professor, what role do you think could alliances with countries like the UK or maybe deeper ties with Asia and the Gulf play in helping Switzerland hedge against the EU and the US pressure?
At the time when the British people had decided on Brexit in June 2016, there was a plan that the Brits and the Swiss and the Norwegians and the Icelanders and the Liechtensteiners, those 5 countries, should join forces and build a second pillar in Europe next to the European Union. Would have been quite a strong pillar, but it didn't materialize because the British didn't know what they wanted. The Norwegians feared for their superpower position in the EFTA pillar of the European Economic Area. And the Swiss government still had this plan of, concluding this treaty with the European Union as a first step on the path to EU membership.
And sir, the CJEU's approach to disputes with third countries like Switzerland and the UK has drawn sharp criticism. Do you see any potential for reform or challenge to this dominance, do you think?
Well, I think that the Court of Justice will continue acting the way it has acted vis-à-vis third countries. It is quite clear that the Court of Justice is not an independent court in such a case. When it comes to vital interests, the judges will remember where they come from. Nobody can criticize them for that. It's quite natural. You know, human beings are not robots, and judging is no exact science.
And Professor, what would be your message to the Swiss voters ahead of a possible referendum on the treaty package? What is truly at stake?
I think they should vote no to it because it's a one-sided treaty. It's an unequal treaty. And a country like Switzerland, which has a democratic tradition and has been economically successful, should not conclude such a treaty.
And given the evolving global landscape, do you think Switzerland's position as a neutral party will remain viable, maybe in the long run, or is it being eroded by maybe external pressures?
Well, that's difficult to tell, but I would say that Switzerland should not become overly nervous now, go step by step, and not feel that it is under too much pressure. Things can change quickly, and we have seen with the current American president, he may change his view if certain offers come from Switzerland.
Yes. And Professor, how do you assess the potential long-term consequences of the U.S. tariffs on Switzerland's export-driven economy? Could this be a turning point for the Swiss business practices?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I'm careful when it comes to that. But if this would go on with these 39%, this would be a big problem for Switzerland, quite clearly.
And with the new treaty package pushing Switzerland towards EU law compliance, do you think is there a risk that this could be leading to a greater friction with the domestic legal principles or the traditional Swiss values?
Yes, absolutely, quite clearly. I mean, the referendum would no more be the same as it was. But, with my past as a European judge, my main focus is on the Court of Justice. And, who has the court of the other side as its highest court? Who accepts that? That was accepted by China in the 19th century when the imperialist powers, after the Second Opium War, imposed extraterritorial jurisdiction on China. It has been accepted by the former Soviet states, and the European Union wants the North African countries to accept it. But for Switzerland, that's not the model.
Professor, what is your opinion on the idea of Switzerland potentially maybe joining the EU in the future? Even if only partially, would such a shift align with the nation's historical traditions?
Well, in the long run, this could be imagined. It would be much better than what the Swiss government is presenting now, because then you would sit in the institutions, you would have a vote, you would have a judge, and you would be a full-fledged member. The treaty which is proposed now would lead to passive membership. And on top of that, Switzerland would still have to pay a considerable amount of money every year, which obviously is not the case when it comes to the Ukraine and Moldavia and the other post-Soviet countries.
Professor Badenbacher, how should the Swiss industries, in your opinion, particularly in the luxury and pharmaceutical sectors, adapt to survive in this new environment of the aggressive tariffs and the European legal integration?
Well, as I said, when it comes to Europe, this is not a good treaty which has been proposed by the government. It should not be accepted. When it comes to the United States, the Americans say that pharmaceutical prices in their country are way too high.
Yep.
And then they spot two giants in Switzerland, in Basel, and then the way Mr. Trump reacts, he's very emotional and he takes this kind of decision. And he has taken it for the time being. I cannot tell. I have not been part of the negotiating team. But there are those who say that the Swiss pharmaceutical industry must make certain concessions.
And, sir, the Swiss financial sector is known for its independence. How vulnerable, in your opinion, do you think, is it to the growing pressure from both Washington and Brussels? especially in the light of the recent tariff escalation?
Well, the Swiss financial sector has always been vulnerable to a certain extent and had its difficulties most recently with this forced merger between UBS and Credit Suisse. Again, it's more or less an economic question, and I'm always careful, to leave my own field of expertise.
And sir, given the breakdown of negotiations in 2021, what lessons should Switzerland take from the previous EU talks to prevent further complications in future negotiations?
Well, the breakdown in 2021 was not a real breakdown. Mm-hmm. It was more a trick by the Swiss government to claim, we have ended these negotiations. Mm-hmm. But half a year later, they came with the same model again.
And if the Swiss people reject the treaty package in a referendum, what alternative paths would you suggest could Switzerland pursue in terms of strengthening its relationships with the non-EU nations and maintaining economic stability at the same time?
Well, if Switzerland would reject this treaty, then they would have to think. But, given the geographic situation...
Are there any alternatives on the floor now at the moment? I mean, if they don't take the treaty?
Well, there is EEA on the floor at the moment. There's EU membership, or there is nothing at all. Mm-hmm. That would be the British way, and to close ranks with the British. The Swiss and the British always had a close relationship.
Professor, how do you think Switzerland's role as a global financial hub will evolve in the wake of these increased tariffs and the potential legal constraints from the EU?
Difficult to say. Again, that would be a question for the economist, not for a lawyer.
Okay. Do you believe that the Swiss people are fully aware of the implications of these external pressures? Or is there a risk that the government is underestimating public opposition to these changes?
Well, the Swiss people are among the best informed people about politics. This is the consequence of direct democracy. The Swiss vote 4 times every year on federal level, and then a couple of times on cantonal level and on the level of the municipalities. So as far as you can be well informed, I think that the Swiss have probably reached the highest level of knowing what's going on.
Yes. And in your view, sir, is there a way for Switzerland to balance maintaining the economic ties with the US and the EU without compromising its legal and political independence? How can we do that?
Well, again, they have to go step by step. And as I said before, it would be a mistake, in my view, to say, now we have to accept this treaty with the European Union because of the difficulties with the United States.
Mm-hmm. And how can Switzerland leverage its diplomatic channels and neutral stance to negotiate better terms in both the US and the EU contexts moving forward?
Well, with the United States, I think that the negotiations have gone fairly well. The expectation was a couple of days ago that the Swiss would get away with 10% tariff. Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Trump decided otherwise. Yeah. It should be possible to continue where they were a couple of days ago. As far as the European Union is concerned, mm-hmm. I think that the mandate was a wrong mandate from the very beginning. In 2013, mm-hmm. the government decided to accept the Court of Justice of the other side. And with this, Switzerland was on the wrong path. And ever since, they have tried to go on. Then this arbitration tribunal came, and they started to talk about the alleged independence of this arbitration tribunal. But it is, at the end of the day, not convincing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor Karl Badenbacher, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Your insights not only shed light on Switzerland's complex legal position, but also remind us of the broader battle between sovereignty and supranational control that many nations now face. Thank you very much. And as the Swiss Confederation stands at a crossroad, the world is watching. For now, Switzerland may be under siege, but its democratic spirit and its resolve are not easily shaken. And until next time, stay with us and be in focus.